Now from Omid Memarian, who's also in Washington, D.C. He's a senior Iran analyst and director of communications at Dawn. That's a non-profit organisation that supports democracy and human rights in the Middle East and North Africa. And I appreciate you taking the time to come on. I want to start with that topic that I've just been discussing with our correspondent, because despite President Trump's denials, it seems very clear from senior members of political circles in the United States that the US only got involved in this conflict because Israel was going to strike first, and they decided it was more prudent to be alongside them rather than sit back. How does Israel have such massive sway over the United States that it can drag it into a war like this?
That's right. And over the past few days, we have been seeing a lot of criticism towards the administration that it was the Israel that took the U.S. to the war, and it's Israel's war. And the administration has been trying to convince the public that no, there was an imminent threat. Over the past few days, they have had a hard time to convince the public and the media that there was any imminent threat. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio has changed his reasoning behind this attack a few times, and it's been noticed by the media, by the public. And so the U.S. is struggling a lot to convince the public and explain why the U.S. entered this attack. But for a long time, we knew that the U.S. is not happy with the direction of Iran's nuclear program. From the beginning, they have highlighted Iran's nuclear program, whether it had it was an imminent threat or not. From the IAEA, we know that there was no imminent threat when it comes to Iran's nuclear program. So that's one of the things that I think that President has been struggling to explain, even though they are pushing on the fact that the U.S. might have been targeted, or if Iranians were developing some, the direction of building things that could have harmed the U.S. But they have not been able to substantiate that.
I was just reading a quote from Mark Warner, who's a senior member on the Intelligence Committee, and he said there was no evidence that there was an imminent strike from Iran upon the United States. So there are so many holes in what President Trump is telling his people. How is he going to justify continuing with this conflict beyond just a matter of a few days if he can't provide the evidence to show that the US was under threat, and people within his own administration are contradicting him? Is this going to be limited to just a few days?
As you said, the president has a hard time to justify the war. There would be a lot of legal questions about why the U.S. entered this war, and the conduct of the war would be a matter of question in courts. But at the same time, we have seen over the past few days a massive military campaign in Iran. Thousands of targets have been hit. And obviously, the U.S. and Israel have a huge advantage over Iran's military. But at the same time, the military objectives or the targets might be clear for the U.S., but it doesn't seem they have any clear end game. It doesn't seem they have a clear objective on how to end the war. And I think, in general, over the past few days, we have seen that the president has gone from Iran's nuclear program to Iran's missiles program to Iran's proxy groups, and now regime change, and they want to overthrow the regime by sending courts from the western province of Kurdistan. They have been all over the place, and if the courts, for example, enter the country and we have troops on the ground, this is going to prolong the war, and this is not something that the president has ever agreed to or has ever talked about it. He's a president who said that he's not going to enter new wars in the Middle East. He's a president who said he wants Nobel Peace Prize because of finishing wars, not not starting wars. He's somebody who has said that the age of foreign intervention and regime change is over. He has so much to explain to his base, particularly at a year we have the midterm elections in the U.S. and more and more of his supporters are questioning the reasoning and the logic behind this attack, and the fact that America First is gone by basically moving toward the direction that he promised otherwise.
I want to move to the military side of things now, because obviously Iran is sustaining heavy losses in terms of infrastructure and loss of life. And it's clear that Israel and the United States between them have the superiority militarily. But just because they may have the stronger armed forces, there's an issue of how long can everybody keep going in this conflict? The question has been raised about whether some of the countries that are housing US army bases will have enough weaponry to continue intercepting Iran's missiles that are incoming. If they run out of interceptor missiles, they would be left vulnerable. And there's been questions raised about what the stockpiles are that they have. And also, whilst Israel may have superiority, what if it literally doesn't have as many defensive missiles to shoot down the incoming Iranian ones? Could Iran eventually gain the upper hand just by having larger supplies of missiles?
That's a big elephant in the room. We know from how the Iranian regime has been conducting the war, that their strategy is based on creating the highest cost for the U.S. And also, they want to prolong the war. And they understand that the U.S. might have vulnerability when it comes to prolonging the war. And there is so much to be unfolded. There are so many unknowns, and Iranians have, the Iranian government, they know that they are in a place that they can endure much more pain than the U.S. But the U.S. is not in a place to be able to endure so much pain. That's why we see that Iranians have regionalized the war. They have attacked more than 10 countries in the region. They are attacking U.S. bases, and from what we see from their targeting, it appears that they have been getting ready for this type of attacks. Not after the June 2025. 8 months ago, but for years, because this type of planning doesn't seem to be a recent thing. So the Iranian government's strategy is to prolong the war, and they are betting on the fact that the U.S. cannot endure a lot of pain, and they hope that by regionalizing the war and creating a lot of costs for the U.S. and also impacting the global economy, impacting the oil market, they could find an off-ramp and end the war and create a deterrence for themselves and end the war.
I noticed that Qatar says it's evacuating residents near the US embassy. Now, at the time of those incoming attacks on Qatar, the authorities there were quick to say, we shot down, the vast majority, and we have the defensive systems in place. The fact that they're evacuating areas now suggests that there is concern there. And again, that question is, if they run out of interceptor missiles, they would be left completely vulnerable. Is there a chance that actually the US allies in the Gulf, if they become more vulnerable, they will turn up the pressure on the US to stop this?
There is a chance for that. We have to see how much of what the U.S. government is saying is actually fit with what is happening on the ground. The U.S. says that they have diminished 80% of Iranians' missiles capability, and what fear is Iran's drone capabilities, the Shahed drones that have been very lethal over the past few days. And also, we don't know how much of the how Iranians have position themselves for the weeks to come. But definitely the U.S. is in a position that any casualty, any harm when it comes to its personnel in the region, American citizens, American bases, American warship, it could be it could be seen as a matter of failure by many in the U.S. and the president would be under a lot of attack for starting something without understanding or considering the cost for the U.S. at a time the U.S. economy is not in a great shape, and also Americans expect the president to focus more on domestic issues than foreign matters, and so there is a lot of unknowns for the U.S. But we don't know much about internal deliberations in Iran and how much of their capabilities are still intact.
Yeah, that's the big unknown, isn't it? Just how many missiles they have, how many have been destroyed, and how many still exist. Really great to speak to you. Thank you, Omid Memarian, who is a senior Iran analyst at Dawn.